almost all the topics have been discussed. Say, for example, the farmers agitation, we have discussed the pressure groups, how pressure groups will actually act as a uh, policy change makers, and how that is being handled by the system. So very few people have actually are supporting the farmers right now. Majority of the farmer support has been taken away because of that particular incident. So in the longer run, if you think about it, the farmers agitation has lost all the steam. So civil society activism or pressure is no longer working in this particular country unless the reasons are very, very legitimate as per the state. So the moral authority is very important. Apart from that, I don't see any value addition to from that particular article. The health ID article has been actually discussed along with the migrant labor article. That day I told you, right? Prime Minister is trying to bring the National Digital Health Bill or a digital mission where all the data of all the patients will be digitized, so that a migrant labor will go to some different hospital and he will just mention his ID and all his prior history will be revealed. So that is exactly what has been announced, National Ayushman Bharat, a digital mission. So this acts like a digital ID, right? The technical details are irrelevant, but how is this going to help the system, or how is it going to help the marginalized and weaker sections of the society is more important, right? Think about it. If they go to a hospital, the hospital cannot fake treat them. See, now right now what is happening under insurance schemes and all these things, they will keep you in the hospital for 2 or 3 days without any rhyme and reason, just because you are getting some insurance. But if they have to actually enter how many tests have been conducted, what are the details, every tiny detail will be digitized, then the misuse of these kind of insurance schemes like Ayushman Bharat will also come down. Apart from that, the long-term benefits to the migrant labor will be higher. Not only migrant labor, it will be going to be a revolution for each and every person in the country. As usual, we can think of data security. How secure is that data going to be? So as soon as possible, government needs to pass that data protection bill, right? Can you think of any other usages for that particular health system? How creatively can we use that particular digital ID? Data, that is the heading, right? Data driven policy making. Okay. What do you think about this Deshabhakti curriculum? Deshbhakti curriculum.
Sir, in my opinion, the patriotism is something that is not taught. It is inculcated with behavior, inculcated in behavior, behavioral changes, and kind of, rather than teaching in curriculum in formally in a classroom.
Okay. Just think about it. I don't want to discuss that particular topic in depth, but just for an idea, we need to know our heroes. There is no doubt about it. We, as a nation, we should definitely understand who are our heroes, what they have done, and how they have contributed to the freedom struggle. So that is no doubt to be in depth understood. But is it actually going to instill patriotism and make citizens contribute to the nation more? Yes. And who defines what is patriotism? Yes, whenever I see a national flag, I stand up, I salute it. Is that patriotism? Or when I see the red signal, I still jump because there is no traffic constable. Is that patriotism? Or I make good amount of money, but I don't pay taxes. Is that patriotism? So how do we define patriotism? Like, is it restricted only to symbols, soldiers, army, some Republic Day, Independence Day, or is it a daily practice that we have to implement in the society so that we are worthy citizens of this great nation? So these kind of questions will make you think more about the uh, value of proper education and mixing it with patriotism. So I will leave it to your own wisdom, but keep an eye on such interesting articles because you can use them in your essays, or the questions might come like patriotism is decreasing nowadays, and so on and so forth. So how can we promote patriotism? One solution is by Arvind Kejriwal, right? Just for idea's sake. There is no harm, but at the same time it becomes like a least creative option. For the 100th time, we are going to discuss about Quad and Afghanistan, AUKUS. Is there any new takeaway from this article? Okay, let me reframe this particular question. How many of you think that India should explicitly declare our intentions towards China can be military, or Quad should be a military organization? Point number one. And also, should we accept the nuclear support from USA outrightly? He says there should be a particular agenda for our. The only agenda for Quad is what?
Free, open, and rule-based Indo-Pacific region.
So we have a clear-cut idea, right? Trade. So when he says, Quad is a paper tiger, Quad is, all talk, no action. I fail to understand what else should India outrightly say that, we are going to, totally nuclearize the Indian Ocean so that China will never enter India. What exactly do you understand by this article?
There is no link between the AUKUS and the Quad. New Delhi is right, as there is a striking similarity in the membership of these forms.
Okay. What is the ultimate objective of India? India's ultimate objective is to be friends of everyone and make as much as possible, as much advantage as possible, right? So AUKUS is going to provide us some kind of security. My only issue with India going for nuclearization of Indian Ocean is it will only lead to arms race. Let's say India has accepted support of USA, then China will put us in the bracket of India and USA have started a new pact. India never had the bad name of totally joining one grouping, and it's not a crime. We are only getting the best out of everything. Chalo, let's accept his argument for a 5 minutes. Quad has declared itself as a military organization. How on earth is it going to benefit India in any way? Did China stop the expansionist attitude? China even yesterday started laying new roads to Lhasa. It is 100% trying to occupy Tibet region, right? China's intentions are very clear that we are not going to stop as long as we have 100% domination in the western front of India. Okay, so either way, even if we pacify them, they are occupying. Even if we are against them, they are occupying. So the juggernaut of China is not going to stop no matter what we do, right? So how does that help India? At least if India is not declaring Quad as a a military organization, not even testing, we are already testing the military organization. In one point he says we should at least try the military role. What else is Malabar exercise? Malabar exercise is purely a military drill. We are clearly sending a message that this entire Indian Ocean is open for free trade, right? So China is maintaining its own distance for its own sake. At the same time, AUKUS is providing more teeth to Australia. It is only going to act as a deterrent. It's just like India having nuclear weapons. Did that stop China or Pakistan from attacking India? Right? 1980s or 1990s onwards, we have official nuclear weapons, right? After Atal Bihari Vajpayee's announcement. While the world knows that India is having nuclear weapons. Still Kargil happened, still Galwan happened, still Doklam happened. So how did any of these things stop any attack on India? Right? In spite of all those attacks, we are still considering Pakistan as a neighbor who can change, and China is our friend till the Galwan incident. We never officially declared, that person is our enemy, this person is our enemy. We will go and sit in the lap of USA. So I fail to understand the wisdom of this particular article. Again, this is purely my personal opinion. So don't get persuaded by this article too much, because we are strategically gaining more by being friends with everyone, and it's not a weakness. And people who cannot see 50 years down the line have an issue with attitude, because last 75 years we had maintained this strategic autonomy, either in non-allied movement or through the new term called as strategic autonomy. It has only served the India's interest. As I keep saying, if India grows as economy, we don't have to worry about AUKUS or some other grouping or 10 other groupings. Only India should grow as, the only concept is India should keep growing as economy. As long as we grow as economy, everybody will take care of India. The moment we stop growing as a nation through economy, then we have to worry about our security interests, right? And if you see the left side column of the words and deeds, the editorial, that shows you how India is getting benefited from USA: pharmaceuticals, defense, supply chain resilience, right? Pharmaceutical industry, Atmanirbhar Bharat, product linked incentive schemes. By not announcing officially as a friend of USA, we are gaining a lot, right? So I want to hear your perspectives, or what you think is the major takeaway.
Sir, is it regarding the editorials, words and deeds?
Both combinedly, both.
Sir, most of the whatever you said, I totally agree, because strategic autonomy has always fetched us more than anything. So explicitly declaring declaring a military alliance against China is something that never India did. Not only with China, even with any other country.
Okay.
So, yeah. So even the Galwan thing also, we see it as an issue rather than a major conflict that will create China as our potential enemy. We never see it that way. We just see it as an issue. So strategic autonomy is better than anything else as far as India is concerned. And if as long as any alliance doesn't deter the Indian economic growth, we don't have to say anything about it. So that is what I thought after reading Habeman Jacob, and this one, words and deeds. Well, actions speak louder than words is basically what that editorial is trying to say. The Prime Minister talks about democracy will deliver, democracy can deliver,
Hmm.
but suppression of voices with UAPA and uh, other sedition acts
Hmm.
is not something what is expected. So the world will judge, the
Hmm.
world will judge India based on what India takes actions as far as democracy is concerned, but not on what it speaks at world forums. Is what that article,
See
what that
again,
editorial is trying to say.
if you observe both Happyman Jacob article and the editorial, both the articles give some snub, matlab, in the sense they try to poke some holes in the argument of government of India. If you see Happyman Jacob, he is saying domestic politics also have a say in relation to what India is doing or not doing. In the same way, the Hindu editorial rightly criticizes, Happyman Jacobs is an opinion. It may or may not be true. Or probably Prime Minister is not worried about China and Uttar Pradesh elections. Maybe he is not. Okay, but coming to editorial article, 100% it is true that we are mother of democracy, father of democracy. All those things are good for saying, but in the ground reality, there are a lot of loopholes. That point is totally accepted. But if you contrast the advantage of how India is taking help of everyone, from Russia we are getting S-400, from France, from Iran, from USA, like this kind of advantage is happening because we are not totally called as westernized country, in the sense we are not in the Western bloc. At the same time, we are not the Asian bloc. India is that country that is destined to be one of the great countries of Asia and the world. So we belong to everyone. By outrightly changing our attitude, just like China, we are not going to gain more but lose more, right?
Yes, sir.
So Happyman's argument is totally valid till where he says Quad might be weakened, but think about it very rationally. If I go for nuclearization of the Indian Ocean or Indian continent, are China and Pakistan not going to make a fuss out of it and take it undue advantage? That means it will give extra freedom for China to do whatever it wants to do. It can empower Pakistan more. Probably it can even negotiate with Taliban more in the name of to control India's rise. So why do we want to poke the bear unnecessarily? Already it is coming, expanding. With the help of America, even the expansion of China can be controlled to a certain point, not beyond that, right? And all these are only theories. That means we are assuming when there is an issue with China, Australia will help, China will help, UK will help, all these countries will help. But in reality, if you are not growing as an economy, is anybody going to help you? No, right? So that single thought should be in mind, that when peacetime is there, when normalcy is there, we have to use every country ruthlessly, use as much as possible, grow as an economy, be so be so important to every other nation that they will come to your rescue. Think about it. Let's say India is very good in pharmaceuticals, or India is very good in exports. India has created an alternative supply chains to Chinese trade. India has started manufacturing. If India is doing all these things, if then China tries to attack, our friends will come to save their own interest, not India's interest. But if India is not connected to the rest of the world in any way, if China is attacking India, something is happening, why will they come to our rescue? Yes. In March this year alone, if you see, USA, the so-called USA, the best friend of India, did not come to rescue Indians because it did not allow chemicals or ingredients for vaccine creation because they needed them. So during issue time, our own friends won't come to help us unless there is a vested interest. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
So, the first and most important thing in any UPSC aspirant's mind should be there. You can hate the policy of a person, but never the person. The moment you hate each and everything about a particular party, person, or individual, you can never see things clearly because your own biasness will cloud your judgment. Right? I hope you understood what I'm trying to tell you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so there is one more article, high water. Have you read this editorial? Yes. Narayan, what is the takeaway from this particular editorial? We have discussed the solutions part for this kind of issues also in a very subconscious way. If you think about it, you might remember few points. What did we discuss? Healthcare improvement. No, not that. See, the frequency of the storms have definitely increased. Nobody can deny that particular point. But we are discussing something else. What is that point? Think about it. It's visible on the screen that is shared to you.
Institutional structure and insurance system.
Yes. So how or what point have we discussed?
Sir, I could recollect two incidents when we discussed.
Okay.
One is when we talked about democracy delivers to the last man in the line. Then you gave example when cyclone affects or when a project is announced and dislocation happens, there should be a proper deliberation. And then there we talked about these institutional structures where whenever I think whenever a disaster happens, there should be a mechanism to immediately address the affected. So there I remember, sir. And one more thing, even during this climate change also, when when we discussed this mangroves are being cut away, and because of that cyclones are increasing, and because of that natural disasters are happening. And even then we discussed the cyclone prediction mechanisms. During that time also I remember that we discussed this something relevant to this stuff.
Okay. What about insurance? Have we discussed anything about insurance?
Yes, sir. Regarding when we discussed this 0.49 paise railway insurance, that is not at all a burden.
Very good.
What a person may not be able to pay 5,000, 6,000 premium, but he can pay 1 rupee per day, even or 10 rupees per day. We discussed this during eShram portal. eShram portal data driven policy making did also come into picture. There we discussed, when if we have data, then the government can announce these kind of schemes. And for then eShram is all about ensuring social security to unorganized sector. So there also we discussed this insurance systems.
Okay. So do others remember? Maybe I think we discussed in agriculture, production and harvesting crops. No, see, institutional structure and insurance schemes. The two important things we have discussed is one is about micro insurances, right? So the most powerful and important thing here is micro insurance at individual capacity. But in institutional structure is creating something in relation to, let's say, every time electricity, telephone, shops, homes, shelter homes. So when these things are destroyed, we can have an alternative insurance schemes. Yeah. So that is also a cost or economic loss to the system. Every 6 months, if the Odisha state or West Bengal or India has to spend thousands of crores, instead of spending all those 1,000 crores, we have to invest them in long-term infrastructural things. So there was an article few months ago or few weeks ago in Hindu as well, which recommends creating such infrastructure, which is cost incentive. Like, yes, for the initial time, it is hugely costly, it is burdensome, it is having a lot of problem. But at the same time, we can use the same amount of money to create long-term infrastructural solutions and structures which cannot be or won't be affected very easily by the system. I mean, the cyclones are natural disasters. At the same time, we have to make sure the recovery is very quicker rather than the effect. See, people are not worried about these cyclones and all those things, but people are more worried when they are affected for months together because of these kind of cyclones. So if you are not recovering them financially, there will be a lot of problems. And if you are not investing in the infrastructures, that is also going to be a lot of problem. And this article nicely brings the climate change and how the number of cyclones are increasing in, let's say, the Arabian side, which is not supposed to happen. And how are we going to cope up? Imagine floods, flood management, cyclones, and sea level rise. All the three things coming together, the disasters will be unprecedented. We will have more internally displaced people than many nations. Right? Okay. This is a very simple article. This talks about horizontal diversity and vertical diversity. Is this useful for UPSC?
Yes, sir, it is useful. GS3, GS3 health education, human resources.
How will you use this article?
This is regarding there is a asymmetry in representation from rural and urban backgrounds in reputed universities.
Okay.
So how to, there might be a question that what can be done to address this. So
Okay.
there we can use this.
The most important thing is the first and second lines, right? I mean, in the sense, how many tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 city children are coming to universities? How are they getting advantaged? And how many children are moving from a particular district to the nearby districts? You get the idea, right? If you see the Jamia statistics mentioned in that article, majority of them are from Uttar Pradesh. By sheer proximity, more and more people are moving to Jamia. Okay. In the same way, if more children have access to, let's say, very good universities because of geographical proximity, that will bring diversity. Yes. I think this is one, yeah, this paragraph. You get the idea, right? So if you are a policy maker, what is the major lesson that you are going to take away from this lack of diversity?
Need for establishments of reputed institutions in tier 2 and tier 1 cities.
Mhm. Okay, then I'm not hearing others. They don't even type. See, what are they doing? Very few people are participating. Yes, Pratyusha. As a policy maker, what is your perspective on this article?
So,
Mhm.
so I would think of establishing an equal representation commission, so as it is there in US.
Okay. Equal representation as in from different states. See, if you see the Jamia article, no people or no students are coming from Arunachal Pradesh, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, or Telangana. So as a future policymaker, how will you use this data? Not in pushing people to Jamia, as he rightly points out. We should think how people are moving from one university to another university, and how many people are being represented in different kind of institutions. Yes, and most importantly is the access reaching to the remotest villages, towns. How many people are coming from small villages? If I know the data, I will identify why people are even not coming to the universities in the first place. So that can be a major understanding, right? And not everybody has a financial capability, or there might be socio-economic reasons from not moving from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities to a bigger city. So all these things can be understood and be implemented, right? So that's horizontal regional diversity should be there, and each and every state should try to develop their world-class infrastructures, and select a few institutions should not be a replacement for the mega institutions, right? Each and every small university or college should do its job perfectly, so that this excessive dependency on certain universities or institutions will also get diluted, right? This can be supported if I cannot create infrastructure in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. I can create massive online open courses, MOOCs, MOOCs, so that education will reach the remotest corners of the society as well. Clear? Yes. Revitalizing PM Kusum. Is this, see, this is a direct prelims question. I don't want to ask, is it important? Yes, it's very, very important. So that's one thing. So how are we going to use this? What is your takeaway?
The information about to help the farmers access,
The information about farmers access.
to help farmers daytime solar powers for irrigation.
Okay.
Nothing but to reduce the farmers subsidies like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this also helps in INDC. Yes. Does this help in reducing the farmers cost of agriculture? See, PM Kusum is a very simple scheme. It empowers the farmers to use solar panels for different kinds of agricultural needs. Either they can use it for their own pump set, or they can have this feeder connection. That means they will create a lot of electricity and sell that electricity to the discom companies. This is grid connected. In Germany and in some Scandinavian countries, we can see that not only I produce enough for my own domestic needs, I can export the excess agriculture to the grid. So solar energy is created, it is sold to discoms, and those people who cannot afford solar, the solar setup, will use the solar renewable energy. It's a win-win scenario for all the players involved, right? So here he is suggesting few items. The first is to reform the discoms and to create that ecosystem where farmers will be able to sell their data. Sorry, sell the data in the sense export the electricity. It's a cost based approach. That means the initial cost is very high, so many farmers are not willing to take that. Next is this one, financial support. Many farmers actually fail or struggle. What is utility and distributed solar power? Utility, again, distributed solar power is exactly distributed. That means, let's say you have 10 acres of land, you are using solar energy, you have created enough amount of electricity that you can sell it to the discom and it will be used by any place else. Understood? So I think the rest of you either haven't read the newspaper or totally happy with just reading whatever is there.
No, sir. The PM Kusum article was little complicated to understand.
Okay. See,
I couldn't grasp the solutions context, sir.
okay. So this is your farm, right? Within the farm, you set up a solar panel and you connect it to the grid. So this entire farm can be still utilized. Even under the solar panels, you can grow some vegetables or something which does not need direct sunlight. So no part of the farmer's land is being wasted. And the second point is he can use the same electricity for his needs. Okay. So if as a farmer, if I want to set up more solar panels, I might have to join with my neighbors because my land size is less. So that is where the recommendation of streamlining land regulations will come into the picture. So there are rules and regulations which act as a hindrance for the expansion of the solar panels. So that has to be reformed. And to set up a huge solar plant or farm is also cost effective, right? Not cost effective. So government should give some financial support. Such are the basic suggestions given by this particular article. The simple concept is more and more farmers should adapt these solar panels. More electricity should be generated from the solar power, and it should be used by both farmers, and the farmers should be able to sell it to the grid. When they sell it to the grid, they make amount of money, and the renewable energy is sold to lot of other farmers who cannot set up a farmer support systems, right? Clear? So don't worry about like what he's trying to tell. Understand the core crux of PM Kusum. PM Kusum is a where agriculture plus sustainable development comes into the picture, especially in relation to electricity. Okay. If something is really important, don't worry. We will discuss that threadbare, but that is not the case. Hmm. These are all prelims kind of questions, self-explanatory. You don't have to remember each and every missile or defense system that is in the news. If it is nuclear capable or if it is having a international ramification, like the S-400 was in the news very much that year. So such kind of articles are important, or else it's just that India is very nicely going for defense development, which will reduce our cost of burden. Now, again, without going into the politics of this particular article, you can understand the difficulty of attaining socio-economic caste census data. I have told you, like, caste is a very complicated topic. There is also a concept called as Sanskritization. That means people from lower castes will try to emulate the upper caste people. Again, lower caste and upper caste is, for lack of better words, we are using them. So when people try to emulate, they will create their own caste. 60 or 600 people can have their own caste. So according to government data, there are anywhere between 40 to 46 lakhs different caste, subcaste, and so many subcastes. So if we keep on counting each and every caste out there, it might be an exercise of its own, and we can never empower anyone. But what was our original intention? X1, X2, X3. If X1, 2, 3 are subcaste of X group, if 2 is the weakest of the group, we have to empower them. That was the entire idea of doing caste census. But if there are 46 lakh different castes in this country, right? Because everybody are either assuming their own caste is the best caste out there, because X24 still thinks they are the actual X, right? So because of this sub creation of the subcastes, this entire exercise will become useless. Either people have to be segregated under macro caste. So government should have authority to declare only X1 to X10 are the castes under X group. Then everybody should fit into 1 to 10. Then X21 will come and say, you know, how can you exclude my group? It is going to create a nightmare for the government, right? I hope you understand the context. So this sensitive exercise of identifying caste should be done more in the lines of economy rather than on the social status. Are you poor? Yes or no? Which category do you macroly belong to? OBC? Yes. For example, OBC, what is your family income? Do you own cell phone? Do you own four-wheeler or two-wheeler? Okay, you are doing well, you are not doing well. So economic criteria will be a much logical data to segregate people in 21st century India, rather than go and ask them their social status, because as you can see, it's very, very complicated. And the intention should always be to empower the last man in the line. X24 is the weakest group within all the X groups. Then I will focus more on X24, not use them for vote bank politics. Then it's totally worth it. Or else the better criteria to empower can also be financial status. What is your money? How well are you doing? I hope I am making sense. You are able to understand what I'm trying to tell you. Any questions from what I have discussed just now in the caste census? Would anyone love to repeat what I told you? Okay. So I think this offline thing is not, you know, healthy for long-term discussions, right? So I think today's paper is not totally worth spending 1 hour. Yes, from tomorrow we will shift to offline. And that's it. These are the major topics from, but the census are not properly done. And how can we identify a particular caste which is weaker? Again, the simplest target is to use income tax data, to use, you know, to macro fit the people. Already there are 4 groups, right? OC, OBC, SC, ST. These are the 4 groups. If I get into these groups, there are again lakhs and thousands of subgroups. Instead of giving them the power to classify the subgroups, either government should fix X number of subgroups. Okay, that is one way. Prefix the subgroups and push everybody into the subgroups. X 1, 2, 3. Okay, you either belong to 1, 2, or 3 under X, Y 1, 2, 3. Like this, government can prefix the subgroups, or it can say one rule. It doesn't matter whether you belong to X or Y under OBC. How much money are you making per annum? What is your income tax paying status? How many people are having post graduation from your particular community? Or how many people are going to schools from your particular community? Do you own land? So such kind of economic segregation questions should be asked, so that within the OBC, we will exactly know how many people are actually poor, irrespective of whether they belong to X, Y, Z, A, B, C, or so on and so forth. So subcategorization is only useful if the number is fixed. Let's say there are 150 subcastes in OBC or 1000 subcastes in OBC. Chalo, fine. 1000 is manageable, but 46 lakh subcaste is next to impossible to manage. So either fix 1000 subcategories or use economic criteria. Only 2 options are left with the government. But if we proceed with n number of subcastes, it is never going to work. I hope that explains your question, Srinivas.
Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. Okay. Any more questions? Sir, CJ said, what women of the world unite? You are not okay in this context of presentation of women. Can they? Yeah, you can use this as a quote. When you are about to write an answer about women empowerment, you can use this as a quote in the first line. First quote that. And there is no crime in using the data, because Chief Justice, you are hiding behind Chief Justice. If that is your own creation, we should have some issues, but you are hiding behind Chief Justice of India, so nobody should have an objection with that. And there are invisible chains in the society. We may not see that. Right. Yeah. Okay then. So tomorrow we will go for offline, and if there are any questions, we will discuss that. Yes, recommended candidates marks, both people who failed and cleared mains also, their scores were declared. So I will show you the marks tomorrow and we will discuss. Okay. Okay then. See you all tomorrow in class. Hope to see you soon.